as sort.
Of the Institute of Environment Sustainability. I don't have any work to do tonight except to get this kicked off. I want to thank Boeing and Tina and John Quinn and the Oppenheim family for supporting this event. And of course, it's co-hosted by the Emmett Institute. We're trying something a little bit different here. Our environmental issues are complicated. Usually, we hear one view in a lecture and another view in a lecture. It doesn't really work that way. I don't know if you have kids and you've raised them, it's not simple. So this panel is about it not being simple. We hope to have a lively discussion about energy futures. And we're going to end up, the format will be to have introductory remarks. Our moderator will orchestrate and conduct the discussion. And last 30 minutes, it's open to you. And you get to address questions to them and interrogate them and make them work for the evening. They're not going to be introduced because you have a sheet with their biographies. The only person I'm going to introduce is our moderator, Oliver Morton. He's the energy and environment editor for The Economist. He's written a number of books. One that just recently came out that I really want to sort of recommend, The Planet We Made. So if you're really serious and interested about climate change and worried about it, this is a book to read. He's a tremendous writer, and it'll make you think in really fresh and novel ways. And then as you see, when he bounces across the stage here with his garb, he truly is an original thinker. Oliver.
Thank you very much, Peter. I should actually just say, just in case on the live stream, my beloved colleagues, Miranda or Henry, are listening, I'm not actually the energy and environment editor of The Economist. I'm the briefings and essays editor. They do those fine jobs now. Thanks very much for coming to this. It's a topic that couldn't be more, well, I was going to say timely, but it's going to be timely for a long time, but it couldn't be more important. And one of the things that I think I'm looking forward to hearing the panel talk about is actually some of these questions of timescale. This is not an issue that we can settle tonight, but it is an issue that we can turn over tonight in the knowledge that we're going to keep turning it over in our minds and in our policies and in our beliefs for years to come. So the question that's before us is 100% renewable strategy globally viable? And that really makes you ask three different questions about renewable technologies. One is how much can they do? Another is how much do they need to do? How much energy are we actually going to be using in the future? And the third, without which the first two become slightly academic, is there a pathway, an economic and legislative and political pathway, which gets us to where the renewables are doing all those things that they may be able to do? You kind of got to hope that there's at least some of that, otherwise we're slightly wasting our time here. And we do have a context that allows us to hope that, because we do know that in the past, human civilizations have gone through major energy transitions. We no longer rely mostly on the muscles of the beasts of the field to move us around, and indeed, in many cases, we don't rely that heavily on our own muscles to move us around. We no longer, by and large, burn wood or dung or anything else in order to warm our homes, unless it's gas or bunker fuel. We use fossil fuels in a way that we never did 200 years ago, or even just 100 years ago. But when we look at those transitions, and they are epochal, they define the modern history, the post-1750 history of the world very fully, we see that they are complex, and they are contingent. They depend on very finely balanced questions sometimes. We also see that they are rarely complete. So the 100% number there is an interesting one to use for an energy transition, because although we don't mostly warm our homes through burning things, we do still burn things. We burn wood. We do still use animal labor for some things, and especially if we use we, as we probably should, to mean the people of the planet as a whole. In fact, Let me just put in a bracket there. I may actually get on one of my hobby horses throughout the course of this debate and get a little bit specific about who we mean when we say we, because it's a word that's quite capable of a certain amount of abuse. So I may actually check other people and even myself in overusing that. But as people, as a human species, we do still use animals. We do still burn wood. We do not make complete energy transitions normally. However, this energy transition that we're talking about tonight, the energy transition that we are to some extent embarked upon, is a bit different from those previous transitions in that this is something which, through political will up to a certain extent, and through a clear-eyed view of the risks that the current climate system poses to us, or the current energy system poses to us through the climate, we are actually trying to make this transition. And by and large, that was not a characteristic of earlier transitions. They were not willed into being by acts of political consensus. At the same time, that might give you a sense that maybe this transition could be quicker or more efficient or more thorough than previous ones, which just kind of happened. There is another side to that, which is previous energy transitions happened because at least some groups within society had an urgent or pressing or certainly important to them need for a different sort of energy, an energy that could do different things. Steam engines could do different things from the energy that they replaced. Internal combustion engines and steam turbines could do different things. That we have a little bit, possibly a little bit less of in this transition, in this possible revolution. And so we're in a position, we really are in uncharted water. We know that there can be transitions in energy systems. We know that they are brought about by various different, as I say, complex, contingent, and very complete historical processes. We don't know at this stage what this one's going to look like and how it's going to turn out. One thing we do know, though, is that predictions of energy futures often look very dubious only a few decades later. So with that caveat, I'm going to ask the panel, as Peter said, to each outline a position that they take for about 4 or 5 minutes, uninterrupted, and I'm going to try and get them to address the points where they may disagree or to amplify the points where they do agree. And then when we've done that for a little bit, we will start hearing from you, and then we'll get into the really fun bit of the evening. So, with no further ado, I'm going to ask the first panelist, who is Mark Jacobson from Stanford University. Mark.
Thank you. So, we've been developing energy plans, clean energy plans for 100% renewable water and solar plans for states and countries since 2009. Primarily myself and Dr. Mark DeLucci, who's at UC Berkeley, and over 60 other scientists and students. And we've written papers on the order of 15 papers, including 6 or 7 that are specific energy plans, being reviewed by over 35 peer reviewers in the anonymous peer review literature. And these plans look at whether we can transition to 100% clean, renewable wind, water, and solar for all purposes. And so we first looked at the global scale, and then we went down to the US scale, and then we went down to individual states, and then we went back up to look at individual countries. So we've developed plans now for all 50 United States and 139 countries of the world. And just to give you a summary of what we found, for 139 countries, which represent about 95% of all emissions, I mean, the end-use power demand, that's what people actually use today for all purposes, is on the order of 12.5 terawatts or trillion watts. If we go to 2050, that goes up to about 19.5 terawatts. But if we electrify all sectors, that's electricity, transportation, heating and cooling, industry, agriculture, forestry, and fishing, which is what we intend to do through these plans, we reduce power demand, first 32% by the efficiency of electricity over combustion without even changing your habits. That's not even end-use energy efficiency improvements. There's a 32% reduction of demand. And then another 7% we try to squeeze out due to end-use energy efficiency improvements, which is very conservative compared to business as usual case. So we get down 39% end-use power demand. So we have about almost 12 terawatts to satisfy in 2050 of end-use power. And then we say, can we power this 12 terawatts of end use with wind, water, and solar. That's onshore and offshore wind, solar power, either PV on the rooftops or at the utility scale, concentrated solar power with storage, geothermal power, tidal and wave power, and existing hydroelectric without growing conventional hydroelectric capacity. And we find that indeed we've done plans for all 50 states, 139 countries, that we can in all cases, and these are the benefits. We'd eliminate, by doing this, we would eliminate global warming as we know it. We can actually, implementing the plans, 80% conversion by 2030 and 100% by 2050, we get CO2 down to 350 parts per million by 2100. Even if we get 80% by 2050 and 100% by 2100, then we still get it down to 370 parts per million. We would create 22 million net jobs over lost worldwide by such conversions. We'd use about 1% of the world's land, 4.4% of that's for footprint on the ground, and about 0.6% is spacing for onshore wind turbines that can be used for multiple purposes. The cost of energy would be, when we account for the storage and long distance transmission that we also examined, is similar to, the cost of energy is similar to a fossil fuel infrastructure in 2050, but because we need less energy, it's actually each person saves in their pocket on the order of $140 per year per person from energy costs. And we also save another $3,000 to $5,000 per year in health and climate costs, because we eliminate 4 to 7 million air pollution deaths worldwide. We eliminate global warming as we know it. We stabilize prices because the fuel cost of water solar is zero. And we reduce international conflict because all energy is local. Almost all energy is local. We don't have to have international transfers of energy like we do now. We have more separated plants, distributed energy sources, so that reduce the chance of terrorism risk or massive power outages like we do now with lots of large conventional facilities. We reduce energy poverty worldwide. 4 billion people in energy poverty, including 1.3 billion who have no access to energy worldwide. We reduce that. There's little downside. So you might ask, well, why don't we use like nuclear power, which is, I'm sure my cohorts are going to address that, in our plans, and other things like coal with carbon capture. Well, I'll just address nuclear. Part of it is because, first of all, we can do it with what we have, with existing technologies, 98% existing technologies, so we don't need it. And there's a large risk in terms of national security, international security, weapons proliferation, meltdown risk. 1.5% of all nuclear reactors ever built to date have melted down to some degree. 5 countries of the world have secretly developed nuclear weapons under the guise of civilian nuclear energy programs or research reactors. We have unresolved waste issues where we have to store waste for hundreds of thousands of years. And my colleagues want to increase nuclear by up to a factor of 10. I mean, if we wanted to power the whole world with nuclear, we would need about 16,850 megawatt power plants, and we have about 400 today. So even if we have only 5% of the nuclear plants, or 5% of the maximum need, that would double to 800. We would have more countries of the world who don't have nuclear energy right now might be interested in converting that into nuclear weapons. In terms of cost, we have right now wind, the cheapest form of electric power in the United States today, unsubsidized is 3.6 cents per kilowatt hour. Subsidized is around 2 cents a kilowatt hour. Solar at the utility scale is 5 to 7 cents per kilowatt hour. Natural gas is 5.2 to 7.5 cents a kilowatt hour. And nuclear, because there's only one plant there's cost data for, it's recent, is 12.5 cents per kilowatt hour subsidized, and in the US. So we're talking, if you invest $1 in nuclear, you're getting 1/4 the energy output. Plus, it takes so long to put up a nuclear plant, between 10 and 19 years on average versus 2 to 5 years for a wind or solar farm, that while you're waiting around spinning your heels for this nuclear to come up, you're burning coal, gas, and oil on the regular electric power grid. And that's resulting in that, plus the emissions due to the refining of the uranium, which goes from fossil fuels, results in 6 to 24 times more CO2 emissions per kilowatt hour than wind on average. And so these are the reasons we don't want to go there, because we don't need to. It may be better than some other technologies, but it's not so good as wind, water, solar, and there's no need because we can solve the problem with clean, renewable energy with existing technologies.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Mark.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to the other end of the stage, and I understand about 150 meters across the Stanford campus to Ken Caldeira. Ken.
Hi. So I became an environmental scientist and a climate scientist because I'm concerned about nature, and I'm also concerned about people, that people live a good livelihood. And so we need to find affordable ways of solving climate and other environmental problems while providing people with energy services. I'm a climate scientist. I'm not an energy expert, but I read reports from energy experts, and many of these reports indicate that Mark, in limiting his palette of technologies to wind, solar, and hydropower, is oversimplifying the challenges and underestimating how difficult it will be to solve this problem. And so, so to say that a problem is technically soluble doesn't mean that that proposed path is the best way. We can say we can solve the problem of war and strife, and we get world peace tomorrow. It's just a political problem. Everybody just has to put down their guns. But we don't do that. We engage in negotiations. We try to have incentives for people not to engage in violence. We use every tool that we can get a hold of. Let's just focus on the IPCC for a bit. That in climate change science, there was a few papers.
Ken, can you just spell out what the IPCC is?
Oh yeah, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is several thousand scientists and engineers come together and analyze the climate problem and how to solve it. And it comes up with 3 reports. And the first report identifies that the climate change problem is real and very serious. The second report says that the impacts will be dramatic and that adapting to them will be difficult. But the third report says that transforming our energy system will be very difficult, and that we need to use every tool at our, we have to let every possible tool that could contribute compete on a level playing field and let them all contribute to what they can contribute. For example, and so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change had hundreds of energy experts, collectively with thousands of years of experience analyzing energy systems. And for example, one of their conclusions was that later in this century, we might need to use biomass electricity, bioelectricity coupled with carbon capture and storage, and generate electricity and put some of this carbon underground. In Mark's vision, using these agricultural products and carbon capture and storage is not even on the table. And pushing technologies like carbon capture and storage, bioenergy, nuclear, and so on off the table not only makes the problem technically harder to solve, and also, but it also makes it politically harder to solve. It's basically you're telling the fossil fuel industry, you're telling the agricultural industries, the nuclear industries, that you have no participation in any future energy system, and so you should oppose this politically. And you just take several narrow technologies. And so what if these things don't work? What if we don't get good thermal storage? And what if all this pumped hydro can't be deployed? What do we do then? So maybe we want to have a natural gas plant with carbon capture and storage, injecting the carbon underground. Maybe we want to have limited use of bioenergy. So expanding our portfolio of options only can only be better for the environment, because we can use denser systems that don't impinge on the environment as much. It can only be better technically and economically, because if we expand our palette, our portfolio of available options, we can only find better solutions. And it expands the political base that can support a broad portfolio of approaches to try to address this problem. It's like we're going into a boxing ring and we want to tie an arm behind our backs and say, look, we don't want to use all the technologies at our disposal. We just want to limit ourselves to wind, solar, and hydro. And it just makes no sense. It's not 100% renewable. It's not even a good goal. Even if you could do it, if you can get a system that's better for the environment, why wouldn't you want something better for the environment? Hydropower, do we really want dams all over the place? Would you really want wind turbines on top of every mountaintop? I mean, I'm actually pretty good on solar, but I think if Mark's vision works, and solar, wind, and hydropower is as good for the environment and cheap and easy to deploy as he thinks it is, I'm 100% for it. But if it is that good, it should be able to compete with carbon capture and storage, with bioenergy, nuclear in the marketplace, and it should just win. But we should be going for a broad carbon tax, price on carbon, and let these things compete in the marketplace.
Okay. Thanks very much, Ken. The next panel speaker will be Del Rick from the NRDC, where she's Director of Programs.
Thanks. So I guess I'm focusing on the pathway to world peace, where everyone's going to put their weapons down and start building wind turbines and solar panels. So how do we get from here to there? And I'm not sure I'm supposed to do this, but I actually agree, I think, with everything that you said, Ken, because the way that I think of this is not how do we get to 100% renewables, but how do we reduce all the environmental impacts associated with power generation and use worldwide. So from a climate perspective, how do we reduce global warming pollution on the scale and time frame needed to avoid catastrophic impact in the smartest, quickest, cheapest way? And I agree. I would say you put a cap on pollution. You can translate that into a carbon tax, but what we want is pollution down, not cost up. So pollution down, and then you allow all the technologies to compete against one another. I agree with a lot of Mark's numbers. So if you look at an even playing field and you look at cost, then I think energy efficiency number one, and renewables will win in that game. And the challenge is, to keep your thumb off the scale of your favorite technology, which could be nuclear power for some, and to make sure that you're looking not just at cost, but the host of barriers that prevent investment in the best solutions that we have available to us. So, you want to internalize costs with the cap, you want to have level playing field, and then you want to think about what are the barriers. And in this country and a lot of countries, one of the biggest barriers we have is the way that we regulate the utility industry, which is one of the primary investors in all of our energy resources. So if we have perverse regulatory structures that make it a money loser for utilities if customers are investing in energy efficiency, and that's improving their all of our equipment, appliances, buildings, on the transportation side, vehicles, if that's a money loser, then they're going to be opponents to all of the policies and programs that would get you those benefits instead of your biggest investor. And same on the renewable side. If every time customers put solar panels on their side of the meter, that's a money loser for the utility, then they're not going to be supporting it, and there are going to be all these barriers thrown up in the way. There are other barriers: access to capital and financing, transmission planning. We have 100 years of history of planning around large centralized power plants. If we're going to have a more modular, resilient system and a cleaner system, how do we change the way that we do that planning so that efficiency and renewables can really compete on a level playing field? In order to get at those least cost solutions, those are the kinds of policy levers that we need to be able to design. We're not all the way there yet, but what gives me hope are, we just had Paris, so the whole world is in this game now and committed, and they're not even just talking about 2%. They realize that, 2 degrees, that we have to not even go to 1.5 degrees change, and including China and India with, I think, more substantial commitments. Not everything we'd hoped for, but more than people expected. We have the Clean Power Plan, and we did just have a major hiccup with the stay with the Supreme Court. but that plan is going to move forward. And you have a utility industry which has gotten the memo on this, and they kind of give a collective shrug to that stay because their industry is moving in this direction under any circumstances. And then you have the states, and California, of course, is a great leader, but there's also all the northeastern states. So you've got the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative with a cap on carbon pollution in the Northeast. We have a cap here in California. We've got 50% renewable commitments in New York and California, and growing commitments in 29 other states. And these policies have momentum and popularity that even Koch brothers with all their money can't kill, even in places like Kansas. You've got Texas, you've got so much wind, they've got to give power away for free at night. So, these things are really coming into the mainstream to a point where renewables will be the mainstream technology and not the alternative technology. And we are approaching that turning point, I think.
Thanks. Thanks very much. And last, we have Michael Shellenberger, who is the Director of Programs at a new organization, Environmental Progress, where he's also, I have to say, more or less everything else as well. Mike, though, is probably better known for having been one of the founders of the Breakthrough Institute, an eco-modernist think tank.
Thank you, Albert. And thank you, everybody, for coming. So those of us that hope to make it to the year 2050 have the chance to see something really amazing, which is that there is the possibility that every human being on Earth will be able to live a life of basic material prosperity. And that's a pretty amazing thing when you think about the fact that we've been around for 200,000 years. In 1820, 85% of us live in extreme poverty. Today, just 15% of us do. That's an amazing possibility. The other thing that could happen is that overall humankind's negative environmental impact could peak and decline. And this follows the same pattern everywhere in the world. People go from being subsistence farmers who depend on wood and dung, getting jobs in cities, usually at factories or office buildings. They tend to have fewer kids, invest more in them. Pollution rises, all forms of pollution rises at first in cities, then it peaks and declines. Pittsburgh, 1940, smoke filled the streets. Beijing today, Delhi today. But over the last 40 years in the United States, pollution has been going down. All forms of conventional pollution except for one, and that's carbon dioxide. But here's something that's amazing. In the United States and in many European countries, now our carbon emissions have peaked and are going down. And much of that is from our transition from coal to natural gas. That's a vision that I think should be inspiring to all of us, this vision of universal prosperity and more room for nature. So here's the challenge with it, is that to get to that, as Mark mentioned, there's still 2 to 3 billion people that depend on wood and dung as their primary energy. Going to build a lot of hydroelectric dams in Africa. They've got a lot of natural gas. Some of them will be able to leapfrog coal and natural gas. But everywhere in the world still, and a major study just came out of 76 economies, the amount of energy we consume is precisely coupled with our per capita GDP. In other words, the amount of energy it took for us to be making $50,000 per capita in the United States is the same amount of energy it takes the Chinese and Indians. In fact, it takes the Chinese and Indians a little bit more energy. So energy and quality of life are coupled. That's why a lot of us think that energy will likely double or triple globally by 2050, towards the end of the century. In this process, you see some really exciting things happen. People move to the cities and wildlife returns. Forests grow back when people don't need to use them as the wood fuel. In the United States and Europe, our forests have been coming back for 100 years. Our wildlife has been coming back to the point we have so many more conflicts. And as I mentioned, the big challenge as we move is the final pollutant, CO2. We've got to get that number to 0. And you can see a pattern here. We're going from more carbon-intensive fuels, wood and dung, to coal, to oil, to natural gas, to uranium, which is what we use for nuclear fission. Higher power densities in each fuel with fewer pollutants and waste. So when you think about any kind of productive process, when it comes to the environment, it's really simple. You want the least amount of nature, or we call natural resources, coming in. You want the most product, or whether it's electricity or shoes or anything else coming out. You want the least amount of waste and the least amount of, hopefully, zero pollution. What you find is in that progress, that process of wood and dung to coal, to oil, to natural gas, to uranium, that's exactly what happens. declining carbon content, declining pollution content. Smaller amounts of natural resource are required to produce more power. To give you an example, just not far away from here, the last nuclear power plant in California called Diablo Canyon, on 3 football fields area size, it produces power for 3 million people. To produce that same amount of power with solar, you need over 100 times as much land. To produce that same amount of power from wind, you would need 500 times as much land. I rely on the IPCC for the data and the numbers I'm going to be citing tonight. Mark's numbers are not IPCC numbers, and you can just look that up after we're done here tonight. Does uranium fuel, does it scare people? Sure. Do vaccines scare people? Absolutely. Do we get over our fears? We do, when we realize that those fears put us at risk. We can't let irrational fears put us at risk. Go look at the peer-reviewed literature, just Google it on the mortality, the deaths from energy sources. It goes in that same line. Wood and dung to coal to oil to natural gas to uranium. It's a very simple process. It scares us, sure, but fertilizer, nitrogen fertilizer, comes out of the same process to make ammunition. And we don't ban nitrogen fertilizer or say we're not going to use nitrogen fertilizer anymore. It's what Timothy McVeigh used to blow up the Oklahoma City building. We don't allow our fears to govern what we do. We don't ban high-rise buildings. I get terrified when I go into them. We overcome our phobias. So let's talk about the role of solar and wind. They're vital. I mean, I've been an advocate for solar and wind for about 20 years of my life. One of the challenges we had, I spent about 10 years working to build Cape Wind off the coast of Cape Cod. One of Dale's board members, Bobby Kennedy Jr., stopped that project from getting built. It was in his view shed. It was right where he liked to sail. He's also been an obvious critic of vaccines, says vaccines cause autism, and he's been a big critic of nuclear power. So can solar and wind play a role? Sure, but the opposition to solar and wind comes from, you guessed it, people who are concerned about the natural environment. That's where it comes from in California. Local Sierra Club chapters sue to stop solar farms. And I'm not saying it's a wrong thing. I'm not saying it's a right thing. These are local land use issues. But the idea that you can scale up a power source that requires so much more land and to put all your eggs in that basket, I think is a risky move when it comes from a climate perspective. So let's talk about the economics of this. Dale's group, NRDC, which I used to work for a number of years ago, we succeeded in getting huge subsidies for wind and solar. So to give you a sense of it, solar is subsidized at 140 times more than nuclear, and wind is subsidized at 17 times more than nuclear. Don't believe me, don't take my word for it. Google those numbers. Congressional Research Service did the study. Those are the subsidies. When the wind subsidy is cut off, no more wind turbines get built in the United States, full stop. Same thing is true in the UK and Spain, where they just are phasing out those subsidies. So I'm going to wrap up by just asking a question of my panelists. I want to equalize energy subsidies too. I hope all my panelists agree with me. Let's equalize energy subsidies. Let's expand the renewable portfolio standard in all of the states to include nuclear. Let's treat all zero carbon sources of energy equally and fairly. And I'd also further ask, let's work together to stop Diablo Canyon from getting closed down. NRDC hasn't taken a position on it. Mark Jacobs has called for the last nuclear plant in California, wants to tear it down. That plant produces more power than all of our solar in the state, which has taken 20 years to build up. It'll put the equivalent of 2 million cars worth of carbon dioxide pollution on the road overnight. How often do you get a chance to prevent that much carbon emissions from going up? So I want to invite all of you as well to please join me in saving Diablo Canyon and preventing California from going the wrong direction on climate change. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. I'm now going to lead the panel in a few questions and ask them to sort of like join in with the process. And I'm actually going to start off straight back with Michael. Talk me through how a fear of nuclear proliferation is equivalent to a fear of vaccination.
Oh, it's very simple. So first of all, let's clear something up. No country has developed its nuclear weapons from a nuclear energy program. What Mark said was very clever. He said a nuclear program or research reactors. How do we know that Iran wants to build a nuclear weapon? Because you can tell. We have inspectors that aren't allowed in. They can spy on it. We know what they're doing. Countries, whether it's China or India or Russia or the United States, we develop our nuclear energy programs after we get those weapons. So the vast majority of emissions in the world come from about 20 countries, most of which already have nuclear capability or could expand it. So we're not talking about spreading nuclear power all around the world. My wife is a public health sociologist. She studies how people die. And I tell her the mortality numbers from all energy sources, and she kind of laughs. Nuclear, of course, is the best. How can we say that nuclear radiation is a public health problem when it kills nobody? I mean, Chernobyl had no containment dome, it had a huge fire, and 50 firefighters died, and we can extrapolate that maybe a few thousand people got cancer. But nobody dies from the radiation of Fukushima. What kills people? Panic, radiophobia, fear-mongering. They evacuated hospital intensive care units. That's what killed people in Fukushima. So it's do not let our irrational fears of this technology put us at risk. That's what I would say.
Okay, Mark, if Mike's right that you called for the Diablo Canyon to close down.
It's in Mother Jones magazine.
Could you explain what the advantage of closing down a working nuclear plant is?
Yeah, I'm going to first take a page of debates and respond to some of the misinformation. So both Mike and Ken have stated that IPCC has blessed nuclear power and think it's such a good technology that we should just let it ride. So I'm going to quote IPCC. These are the exact words. IPCC 2014 Executive Summary, page 517, if anybody wants to look it up. Barriers to and risks associated with an increasing use of nuclear energy include operational risks and associated safety concerns, uranium mining risks, financial and regulatory risks, unresolved waste management issues, nuclear weapons proliferation concerns, and adverse public opinion. And then they put in parentheses, robust evidence, high agreement. But this means IPCC is in total agreement almost that there are weapons proliferation risks with nuclear energy, and there's waste risks, there's all these other risks. Another thing, Ken says that IPCC says that we should try everything. Okay, but I'm going to again quote IPCC. They state that although nuclear is one option and carbon capture is another option, they quote, a combination of some, but not necessarily all of the options is needed. So they do not say that we definitely need it. They say, okay, it's one option to consider. To the claim that our work wasn't referenced in IPCC, it was. We actually have our papers cited in the IPCC document. They're right here. Even I'll find the quote in here in a few minutes. With regard to hydroelectric power, we don't add any new hydroelectric power, conventional hydroelectric power. The only hydro that is added in ours are pumped hydro storage, which are existing pumped hydro storage plus proposed licenses in the United States, for example, that are already proposed licenses and pending licenses. So there's no new, we're going to just jump hydroelectric power huge amounts. And with regard with coal with carbon capture and sequestration, here's the problem with coal with carbon capture. We've done in 2009, we did an analysis reviewing all these energy solutions, which Ken doesn't mention, that we analyzed carbon capture. The problem with it is the carbon capture equipment requires 25% more energy. So you actually need 25% more coal. And so you have to mine and transport 25% more coal, and you don't reduce any of those emissions. So although you reduce 85 to 90% of the emissions at the stack from the coal-fired power plant, 1/3 of the emissions don't decrease, but they actually increase 25%. And plus, you don't reduce any of the other emissions associated with coal, including the sulfur oxides, the mercury, the hydrocarbons, the carbon monoxide, the particulate matter. And we're concerned about the 4 to 7 million people who die every year from air pollution. You would actually increase air pollution with coal with carbon capture, as it's known today, 25%. And so it doesn't even exist at any commercial scale worldwide. So the Arctic ice is disappearing so rapidly, maybe gone entirely within 15 to 20 years. And so they want us to wait around and hopefully develop some miracle technology that's going to come around and save us when the Arctic is disappearing below our feet and we have solar and wind that can be deployed.
Okay, Mark, can I just comment on that? Do you really think that there's a deployment pathway that can do anything in a 15-year time scale to things like this? You're just talking about the ice, that there was not enough time. But my understanding, and I know there are people more expert than me on the panel, is that there's a fair amount of inertia in the system, and stuff that you do now is not going to change something in 10, 15, 20 years.
Well, this is why we need aggressive policy measures. Certainly last year in Europe, 100% of all new electric power was wind, water, and solar. In the United States, 70% was. Wind is the cheapest form of electricity right now, and solar is the second utility scale solar and onshore wind are the cheapest forms of electricity in the United States today, despite these claims about the subsidies. The unsubsidized cost of wind is 3.6 cents a kilowatt hour. The subsidized cost is around 2 cents a kilowatt hour. Nuclear, the unsubsidized cost is 12.4 cents a kilowatt hour. According to Lazard 9.0, it's 2015 costs of energy. Everybody can look it up. These are the costs of energy. So we definitely think that we can if we have aggressive policies. Otherwise, yeah, it's going to take forever, but we need aggressive
you're saying that
policies.
with aggressive policies you can change climate in 15 years?
Not the climate. We can change energy infrastructure. The climate will lag.
Right.
But we'll start to get there. We'll do the best we can. You can only do the best you can. I mean, you can't.
And how do you feel about the fact that other approaches to modeling these? There's a paper by Kevin Hansen recently in Nature Climate Change saying that the only ways to get well below 2 degrees are to either have negative emissions or to have a time machine and go back in time and get the policies moving forward. The integrated assessment modeling community seems to have a very different view from the view you put forward on what's possible. Can you just explain to us why those views are so different?
Yeah, because I built for the last 26 years, my career is climate modeling. I built from scratch a climate model and air pollution model at UCLA right here, starting here. And so we simulate with this model. We actually we developed plans for 139 countries, wind and solar and the existing water and other technologies. We put them in the model, count for the feedback of 2 wind turbines of the changes of kinetic energy to the extraction of power, extraction of solar energy. We developed time series of wind and solar resources. And we look at the CO2 emissions that come out of the atmosphere due to the shutting down of all these plants. And then I have a simulation, I have a plot I can show you up here of all the IPCC scenarios and our scenarios with 80% conversion by 2030 and 100% by 2050. We get down to 250 parts per million by 2100 using our scenarios. Nobody else has looked at these scenarios, except there are studies that do look at just cutting off all emissions, and they agree that you do decrease your CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. Whether that translates into temperature changes is a different issue because they're aerosols as well. But these models that are used for these IPCC scenarios, the problem with them is in order to run thousands of years, they're so simplified, they take out most of the physics and the chemistry and the cloud microphysics that are included in the model that I developed over 26 years.
So did you say down to 250 parts per million?
Sorry, 350.
Okay.
350.
Ken, you were wanting to come in there, but before you do, I wanted to say something, because you're a very nice, equable, fair-minded sort of chap, I've noticed. And it strikes me that the IPCC might be a bit like you, and might just say, well, let's give everyone their chance to say that their thing's good, and we won't. And the fact that the IPCC, basically the chapters of the IPCC Special Report on Renewable Energy were largely written by people interested in those particular energies. So of course they found that all energies had something to offer. Isn't going along with that just really not having the guts to do what Mark's doing and doubling down on the ones that really matter?
I don't expect every technology to be able to win in a future marketplace. I'm just asking that we allow them to compete. Mark quoted the IPCC saying that no one technology is necessary, and that's completely correct. If let's say we didn't have solar power, we wouldn't just say, oh well, game's over, the planet's going to warm. We would collect all the other technologies together and do our best to solve the problem. So but each technology we take off the table makes the problem that much harder to solve. And Mark's concern about the time scale is exactly why his proposals worry me so much. Because if we look at time scale, what's time scale to get an offshore wind sited in the United States? So far, the evidence is it takes forever. When there's problems with endangered animals and trying to put the solar panels in the desert, so there's no shortage of problems. Well, let's talk about the rest of the world. Africa, South Africa just built 2 5-gigawatt coal plants. Nigeria, a corrupt government, rich people sitting on oil. We have to wait for them to solve the problem of their corruption and local governance before we can get them to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at a time when, of course, they need to increase energy access at the same time. And so maybe we could get them to burn their oil and do carbon capture and storage, but if we need to solve the problem of corruption in the developing world and get benevolent governments before we can address the climate problem, we're never going to address it in time. So we just need to use all the tools that make sense and that can compete in the marketplace.
Dale, I was really interested by one of the things you said, extolling the virtues of wind energy, that you have to give away the energy at night in Texas. I was thinking that sounds great, but it also struck me that if I was thinking of investing in something, then investing in something where I have to give away the product because I can't find a market for it doesn't sound great to me. So I wanted you to talk a bit about the economics. Is there a problem, as some people hold, that as you move forward with renewables, you do get this destabilizing effect on traditional energy markets? You have to reimagine the market to deal with a large amount of production at zero marginal cost, which is what renewables offer you.
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole industry is at a turning point right now. I mean, the utility business model, the rise of renewables, the rise of energy efficiency, which has really become a huge investment for utilities across the board, and then all the issues around resilience and climate adaptation, which we haven't even talked about, and the need for systems, an energy system that can provide us the reliable, affordable, and environmental performance that we need that we don't have right now. And we don't have a planning and investment structure that's built for that. So we need to reinvent the way that we ask utilities, especially because we regulate them, but the industry generally and the rules that we set up to drive a different way of thinking and investing that's going to give us those solutions so that we have the least cost, which we don't have now. I mean, that's not a rational setup, right? Even things like there was just a NOAA paper that Mark commented on around having more high voltage transmission, and it's just one option. But you know, we're broken up into regional markets, so wind is not where the population centers are. So you know, what does an investment strategy look like in terms of building out the grid to address that, so that you don't have these mismatches of where the power is and where the people are, and you can connect them. And you're doing this in a long-term, I mean, energy is a long-term investment planning scenario. You can build wind farm, not offshore, but, you know, wind and solar, and especially energy efficiency, you can build those out quickly, but planning in advance does still take a lot of time.
I wonder if I could ask you to come in on Ken's point, that by narrowing down the number of avenues you're going to pursue at the beginning, you have a project that's much more brittle and prone to failure if you can't actually push it through. And there is this point that Michael mentioned, when subsidy regimes change, so does deployment of renewable energies. It's certainly true that Spain has something like 27 gigawatts of wind power, but only 1% of that came in the last 2 or 3 years, because basically that whole process has stopped. So the question was, what this brittleness?
Is it from Mark?
No, this was from Mark.
Oh, me.
I was echoing Michael's point by saying this point of Ken's, that there's a brittleness to your program if you build it around just a few technologies rather than having a broad base.
No, I disagree, because when you have plenty of something and it's low cost now, for the most part, I'm not saying every technology that we're proposing, like offshore wind, is more expensive right now. Of course, that is, you know, when you deploy it, you can either deploy or you can spend money on research, okay? So if you start deploying things, because of the mass deployment, costs come down and there's automatic money goes into more research and dropping the cost further. This is what we've seen with solar especially, but also wind. Massive deployment costs have come down.
But doesn't the Spanish example rather fly against that? Because you've got massive deployment, I mean a huge deployment program over about 10 years. They then changed the subsidy regime, and there's been no deployment since.
Well, it's certainly, I mean, policies are, I'm not saying it's going to happen on its own. We need policies to be put in place, and aggressive policy. We have to decide collectively as a society, do we want to do it or not? I mean, it's not just going to happen by itself.
It does need that level of subsidy that it's now been taken away from it.
Policies, I mean, subsidy is one type of policy. It needs aggressive policies. It could be mandates that we have a certain percent of renewable energy or a certain percent each year. It could be, carbon tax. I don't know. I mean, that's just one. There are a lot of types of subsidy. I mean, fossil fuels and nuclear get huge subsidy too. I mean, if you look at integrated subsidies over time, I mean, it's a massive amount. So subsidies are not bad, especially if because the benefit is health costs alone in the United States, 63,000 people die every year still from air pollution, despite it has gotten better. And that still costs 3% of the GDP of the United States. And worldwide, it's 4 to 7 million people. It's on the order of 3 to 7% of the GDP. So that's a subsidy that's not being paid for by the current industries. And climate's that's $25 trillion per year, by the way, by 2050. Climate's another $17 to $25 trillion per year by 2050. By 2050. So these are subsidies that really calculate out to about $3,000 to $5,000 per person per year that we're subsidizing these industries by. And so, if we have to subsidize some of these technologies, get them to market faster to drop their price, that's certainly a benefit compared with cost. I mean, there's the business cost and then there's the social cost, which includes the business plus this health and climate cost, which we all pay for these health and climate costs. I mean, higher insurance rates, higher hospitalization rates, higher workman's compensation rates, lost work days, lost school days, emergency room visits. All these costs are being paid by all of us that we don't realize are due to these fossil fuels right now.
Okay, Mike,
Can I just jump in? So in the early 1800s, there was somebody named John Etzler who wrote a book saying, we can power the whole world on wind, water, and solar. It was this fantastic vision. He wrote a pamphlet on it. He went around the country preaching it. Ralph Waldo Emerson read it. He said, this is very interesting. He said it to his friend Henry David Thoreau, and Henry David Thoreau read it and said, this is horrible. This would destroy the natural world because the energy densities of wind, water, and solar are so low, it would require destroying nature as we know it. That was Henry David Thoreau's conclusion from it. It's just as true today. In the early 60s, the Sierra Club was in favor of nuclear power in this state. Why? Because it's zero air pollution, zero water pollution, tiny land use footprint. Ansel Adams was in favor of it. Will Seery was in favor of it. It ended up dividing the Sierra Club. Why? There was a small group of very misanthropic Malthusians. They did not want immigrants coming to the state. They did not want people coming to California. They did not want immigrants or migrants coming here. And they saw cheap, clean power as a way to enable that. And so they fought Diablo Canyon in California. It divided the Sierra Club. Friends of the Earth was created. But they figured out that it actually wasn't a very good argument for the public to tell them that we want to stop that plant because we don't want cheap power, because we don't want growth. So they switched. They said, it's dangerous. They said, it'll cause a meltdown. And they made up all sorts of other reasons. This is in 2 wonderful histories of Diablo Canyon you can find anywhere. What's happened over the last 10 years is that people like Stuart Brand, Bill Gates, Barack Obama, Jeff Sachs, environmentalists all around the former head of Greenpeace in the United Kingdom, Mark Linus, Ken, me, we've changed our minds. We got over this irrational fear of this technology. And we did it because when I look at India, in Mark's plan, Indians who consume 15% of the power we consume per capita, in Mark's plan, Mark would have the Indians consuming less power. Ask yourself about the social justice implications of that. I'm about to go there. I'm going to go out of my way to explain to them that I am absolutely opposed to anybody setting limits on how much energy that poor countries can use, given how much energy that
That's
we
a nice
use.
point, actually. That's something I wanted to bring out to the panel in general.
Can I just make one last point?
No,
Just
no,
really quick.
no, at the moment you can't. Maybe you can later. But I just wanted to ask people, everyone, what do you actually think? And I think Mark, in his opening remarks, actually said something about this. What do you think total energy demand in 2050 looks like compared to today worldwide? And I just want very quick, basically numbers, ratios, from all of you. How does total energy demand in 2050 compare to total energy demand today? I'm going to start with Ken.
I don't have exact numbers, but let me guess more or less doubling from today.
Funnily enough, that's also what you've said in a paper, so good. Well done, consistency. Michael.
Doubling.
Dale?
I don't have a number. I'm sure it's going to go up, but I want to just emphasize one disagreement I have with Michael on this point, which is the permanent coupling of economic growth and energy consumption, because it's really energy services consumption and not because of energy efficiency and our ability to use energy more wisely upstream and downstream, that the increase in energy use doesn't necessarily translate into doubling power generation, for
Okay,
example.
Mark, on total primary energy demand in 2050.
Well, we look at end use energy, what people actually use, and it goes up from 12.5 to 19, and around 19.5, 12 to 19.5 by 2050. If we don't electrify, if you electrify, then it just goes down 32%.
And maybe I could ask you to respond to Michael's point about energy use in a country like India, or indeed India, or 1.4 billion people of it.
Yeah, I mean, he's confusing the fact that when you electrify, you reduce power demand by 32%. It has nothing to do with changing your habits. That's what you're confused about. It's not, you're not reducing we assume there's a growth of energy demand in India because the population goes up and things up, but when you electrify, you have less energy demand everywhere. This is the nice thing about electrification. So he's wrong. He's absolutely wrong.
I'm confused. You're
about
saying that we consume less energy now that we have electricity than we did before we had electricity?
In primary energy, if you take gasoline in your car, it's only 17 to 20% of the energy in gasoline goes to move your car. The rest is waste heat. So when you have an electric car, 80 to 86% of the electricity in the electric car goes to move your car. So you need 1/4 to 1/5 the energy to drive an electric car compared with a gasoline car. So you save. Basically, that's why it only costs 80 cents a gallon equivalent to drive an electric car, whereas a gasoline car, well, before the price went down, is $3 to $4 a gallon. It's because you use less energy.
So, Mark, are you saying, okay, but let me just, are you saying that per capita, in your plan, do you allow Indians' per capita energy consumption to go up or not?
Yeah.
It does?
Well, I don't know the exact number, but it goes out according to EIA and IEA projections. We use IEA and EIA projections for future 2050 demand. So it's whatever the international IEA and EIA is.
Look, I mean, Indians they tell you they would love to be able to power their whole country on solar. They need to run their factories 24/7. That's how countries develop with factories. Factories that run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is how factories run, they require baseload power. We don't have that with solar panels and wind turbines. And of all the talk about batteries, they're very expensive. And the kind of utility scale storage we have is also very expensive, significantly higher cost. So they're not building coal because they love pollution in India. They're building coal because they're desperately poor. 700 million Indians don't have any access to electricity. Mostly rely on wood and dung. But just one point, which I wanted to make. The reality is, variable renewable, solar and wind, their value to the grid goes down as their penetration increases. This is very easy to understand. Wind and solar produce power when you don't need them, and they don't produce power when you do need them. Peak power demand is between 5 p.m. when people come home from work and 9 p.m. Television, kitchens, think about it. That's not a time when there's a lot of sunshine shining, and the wind is very variable, not just during the day, but seasonally. When you look at countries that have decarbonized the fastest, that have reduced the amount of carbon per unit of energy economy, the world provides a bunch of natural experiments. France and Sweden in response to the OPEC oil embargo, Germany during its current energy transition. And what we find is that countries that went nuclear, Sweden and France, were able to go 5 to 7 times faster than Germany and other countries that went renewables only. Just Google that, find out which one's faster. This idea that nuclear is slow is a complete myth. And I still haven't gotten an answer, by the way, on whether these two will join me in saving our last nuclear plant in California, or whether if this is really about climate, why are you going to add 2 million cars with carbon dioxide on the road, Mark? I don't understand it.
Since I did actually ask that question myself earlier, I'm interested on that one. Why is it worth closing down an existing nuclear power station?
Well, first of all, it's not because it's not operated. You have to shut it down for a while to refurbish it, and you're going to spend billions of dollars. Why not take that money and invest it in deploy clean renewable energy? Because it could be down. You don't even know how long it'll go down. It could be.
It can produce power until 2065. What are you talking about?
No,
like
to refurbish it. We're talking about. It has to down to refurbish it, and
Well, why are we going to refurbish it? It's running great. It's gold-plated. They retrofit it all the time. It's like the most scrutinized plant because it's upwind. It's near Malibu, it's like incredibly scrutinized. It's a great plant. So why are you going to shut it down?
My position.
Is it about the climate? I mean, if it's about climate, why do you want to do that?
Well, if you're, can I jump in here?
Yes, that would be a welcome jump.
If your primary interest is the climate, then are you willing to have nuclear compete against all technologies, or are you 100%. Insisting on nuclear at any price?
Dale, your organization, I know because I was involved in doing it, You got the subsidy regime that's 140 times more times more subsidy for solar, 17 times more subsidy for wind. The RPS
right, so,
is,
but this-
well
that's
then just,
not
it's very
answering the
easy.
question.
No, it's very easy. NRDC, all you need to do is put out a press release tomorrow saying, we are in favor of expanding the renewable portfolio standard in every state in the country to include nuclear. Why wouldn't you include nuclear in your renewable portfolio standard?
Because nuclear is a mature technology that's had 65 years of intense government support. And if you look at the cumulative numbers of subsidies for the different technologies, you're looking at right today. And, you know, renewables are on the verge of becoming mature technologies, but they're not there yet. And there's a host of market barriers that we're still talking about. And when you are asked the cost question, you go to the differential of subsidies today. You don't answer Mark's question about 12 cents versus 2 cents and why nuclear as a mature technology needs a thumb on the scale and isn't willing to compete. Existing nuclear plants today are shutting down because they can't compete in the marketplace, not because flower power is going or circling them with daisies and saying, oh, we're irrationally. I mean, and honestly,
actually, it is.
I think
it is because of that.
It's really offensive that you're saying to us, we have an irrational phobia against nuclear power that's on par with vaccines, phobia, as opposed to this is an industry that has failed to compete in the marketplace, number one, and number two, there are serious issues about safety and security and waste that the nuclear industry has not addressed. I live close to Indian Point, and there is a story in the news, it seems weekly, about leaks and the failure to run that plant properly. Now, most plants, we've got 100 plants in this country, run well, and most of them are going to continue to operate, for the foreseeable future and be part of the mix. But they're already not even existing plants on the rocks just for economic reasons. And in terms of new build, no market is choosing nuclear. Any new build that's happening, and there's really only one, is because you have captive ratepayers who are paying because a regulator is designed to make that investment.
You're talking the US then, yeah?
I'm talking the US, yeah.
There's just facts that are wrong here.
I'm going to ask Dale a very specific question. I'm then going to give Ken 30 seconds to say something, and then I'm going to come to the audience. But I was interested, you were saying that nuclear is a mature technology, but isn't the whole point of market analysis that renewables are a mature technology as well, that all we have to do now is deploy them in the right amount?
Yeah, wind is, I think, mature in many places. There are other issues besides just the per kilowatt hour cost he's talking about, like transmission system, like siting issues that we haven't worked through with renewables. So sort of issues other than cost that have to do with deployment that are that make the technologies not all the way mature yet. But we're close. I don't think we're going to have direct subsidies for that much longer for renewables, because the purpose of them, as he said, is to speed the development so that they become cost competitive more quickly. That's why you have a subsidy. It's not to prop up a technology that is never going to compete in the marketplace. And then sometimes we do use financial subsidies to attack these other market barriers, which we should attack directly, not just with money.
Okay, and very, very briefly.
Okay, I would like to point out areas where I think Mark and I are largely in agreement, and that is...
Where's the fun in that? Yes, go on.
There's a basic project of electrifying as much of the economy that's not electrified today, and then trying to make carbon neutral fuels for the part of the economy that's hard to electrify, and then to decarbonize the electricity system. There were recently reports both from the National Renewable Energy Lab and from NOAA, Chris Clack and others, that said that with heavy dependence on renewables, we can get 80% reduction in CO2 emission out of the electric sector. And so a lot of the debate is really about this last 20%. And Mark, as I understand his work, seeks to solve this problem by having a massive increase in pumped hydro storage and a massive increase in thermal storage. And whereas these models from National Renewable Energy Lab and NOAA use natural gas backup, basically have a fossil fuel backup. And so I'm just skeptical that all of this pumped storage and thermal storage is really going to work the way Mark thinks it's going to work, and want to have things like carbon capture and storage and nuclear and biofuels available in case the situation isn't as rosy as Mark thinks it is.
Okay, your skepticism is noted. I'm going to go to the audience now. We have microphones which I think are not microphones that move around, nor are they moved by other people. So I think you have to move to them. Yeah, and you can also wave to people. I think, in fact, you have to queue behind the microphones that are there. I would suggest that you queue behind the one in the middle as well. Okay, yeah, okay, there we go. Over there, please. I'm not necessarily going to take all the questions all at once, so just make your question, and please, quick questions, not position statements.
A little reality check. I run an engineering company, a couple of statement of facts. Mark, you should be president, by the way. Sweden and France are actually reducing the amount of nuclear power that are generated. Facts. A good friend of mine works in decommissioning nuclear plants in Sweden. Two renewable energy sectors that were not discussed or I missed because I came late and I apologize. One of them has to do with geothermal power. That's one that's dispatchable, it's 24/7. The other one that we have not talked about, and which I think has a major role to play, is high-altitude wind energy. High-altitude wind energy is consistent and much more powerful than surface wind energy. There's technologies out there that have been developed, for instance, in Germany. That is dispatchable, that's 24/7. Higher, more consistent, more powerful.
Okay, thanks very much. Question there.
Mm-hmm. All the discussion so far has been about reducing the carbon footprint and increasing renewable energy use, assuming energy consumption increases. What about the discussion about decreasing energy consumption, changing the economic model that we're not consuming more energy?
Okay, over there.
At one point, you were wrote in a paper that you included in nuclear's carbon emissions the incineration of cities, which will result from the inevitable nuclear war which will follow. To me, that sounds just ridiculous, and I really wonder how you justify that when the megatons megawatts program has been doing exactly the opposite over the last 10 years. They've taken 500 tons of highly enriched uranium from the Soviet Union and turned it to electricity. How do you justify that?
Okay, thank you very much. There's a bunch of nice questions there. I'm going to distribute them semi-arbitrarily. Michael, tell us why Sweden and France are getting rid of closing down part of their nuclear program. Ken, if you could tell us what you think about geothermal and high-altitude wind. Dale, if you could talk about decreasing consumption. And Mark, if you could talk about the nuclear war question. And I would say you don't do it all at once to go parallel, but I would say, Ken, tell us a little bit about those two other energies that since you are the broad portfolio man.
Well, Mark has also written on this. The most concentrated, abundant renewable energy source on Earth is basically the jet streams, and the power densities can be tens of kilowatts per square meter. And obviously, it's technologically very difficult to get wind turbines into the jet streams, but I could see eventually that being a primary energy source for study. Geothermal, my understanding is that where hot rock is close to the surface, it's economic, and there was an MIT report that said if we can get drilling costs down, that it could become a major source, but right now the going down to that deep rock is expensive. So I think, again, it's a cost thing. I think for the high altitude winds, there's just an engineering thing. For geothermal, largely cost.
Okay, Mark, I'll ask you to comment on that too, but Mike, the French, the Swedes.
Yeah, and I'll just throw in just as a freebie, solar panels were actually demonstrated in the late 1800s. Wind turbines are hundreds of years old, and nuclear power was invented in the 1950s. So which is the technology? California should not be a model. Our emissions actually declined slower than the national average since 2000. Energy Information Administration, all the data is right there. Why? Because we closed down one of our nuclear plants and we had a drought that reduced.
And the French and the Swedes.
And the French and the Swedes, there's a political faction that says that they want to move away from nuclear, but that's not what's happening. In fact, there's already a movement among climate activists in both countries to keep their plants running just as there is in California.
Okay. So the question about what shouldn't we really be concentrating on decreasing consumption?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's already the least cost choice. And in the last less than 10 years, the utilities have tripled investment efficiency. And that's why we have demand really flat, even though the economy is growing. Historically, demand and economic growth went up together. But still, half the states are doing almost nothing. So the low-hanging fruit on energy efficiency is enormous. And in our analysis, we think that we can have demand by 2050, and then you have a much smaller pie that you need to convert into renewables. And then when you increase electrification in order to electrify transportation sector, you just have a lot more room to work with. But that efficiency, both in the transportation sector and the buildings, equipment, and use sector, is enormous potential that we've just scratched the surface on.
That's a US/developed world sort of perspective.
Yes, yes, those are US.
Okay, Mark, two things. One was this question about the effects of nuclear war. The other one was I just wanted to do a crack journalistic version of the geothermal high-altitude wind. If you had to choose one, which is the one that you'd really love to see?
Well, we already include geothermal in our plans, but not the necessarily really, really deep geothermal, but California has a lot of geothermal west. So we include geothermal, and yeah, as the speaker said, it is useful. Also include tidal and wave power. High altitude wind, I mean, it's great if it works, but there have been a lot of companies actually trying to get a high altitude wind, and they've had to keep lowering and lowering, so now they're into the boundary layer. If it works, that's great, but right now I'm less hopeful than offshore wind. With regard to the nuclear, in 2009 we did a study reviewing solutions to global warming, energy security, and air pollution, and we looked at all the factors associated with the different technologies, including risk of nuclear war. And so we did a calculation, well, what if there was one nuclear explosion that resulted between a megacity as a result of nuclear energy proliferation converting to weapons, and that resulted in, it would kill a lot of people, but we also calculated the carbon emissions, as some other studies have done. But it wasn't a lot. I mean, and then we did a risk. Well, because that's what you do when you look at climate. You look at risk, what's the probability of something? We had a probability that from 0, that it wouldn't happen at all, to a probability that we could have one in 30 years. But the overall emissions from carbon were on the order, in the maximum case, was like 4 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, compared to up to between 60 and 180. You look at everything else, the life cycle plus the opportunity cost emissions. So it was a really trivial amount, but of course the number of people killed would be huge numbers.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Okay, you, sir.
Well, despite some differences among the panel, among methodologies, I don't think there's any substantial disagreement on the need for renewables and reducing our carbon footprint. But if we had the conference in another state, I think somewhere around half of the country would completely disagree with that. And it seems like California is doing what it can, but a lot of these policies need to be done on a national level and an international level with the U.S. as a leader. And we've reached we're at complete gridlock. And how do we implement these policies while we have this political gridlock in the country where half of the people don't believe these are necessities?
Okay, thanks very much. Over there.
Yeah, we just had a methane leak up in Porter Ranch you might have been aware of. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. points out that utility-scale wind and solar are actually gas plants because the vast majority of the power produced by a wind and a solar farm is from the gas turbines. Have you calculated how much leak would cancel out global warming or the green energy savings from wind and solar? In other words, if you have a solar farm that's the power is mostly being generated by gas, and that gas infrastructure is leaking, and methane has 84 times the global warming potential of CO2. The CO2 you're not putting in the air is more than made up by the leaking methane. At a certain point, the wind and the solar farm are basically like bailing out the Titanic with a coffee cup.
Okay, thanks very much. At the center.
Yeah, I'd just like to mention that a number of incorrect statements were made about solar. I'll just mention two as to be illustrative. One is the statement that that solar is power is produced at the wrong time of day. Anybody who can make that statement has never lived in the San Fernando Valley in the summer when all the air conditioners are going like crazy. The solar panels on the roof of my house are helping to fight that very problem at the right time. They're producing the most energy when the air conditioning is going like crazy. There's another incorrect statement that, well, that solar takes covering so much new land area. All you have to do is go into up into the Verdugo Mountains or Santa Monica Mountains and look down at all the commercial and residential roofs that are completely empty of solar panels in this city. These are rich homes. These are people who wouldn't think twice about spending $60,000 to remodel their kitchen, but would not put essentially virtually free solar panels on the roofs of their house. And
okay, thanks very much.
Hi.
Yes, please.
I work in the PV industry, and I'm also a nuclear supporter. So I may be a rarity, but my question is for Mark and Dale. Is there anything that would open your mind to the possibility of using nuclear power? There's an awful lot of very smart people that are saying the fuel cycle can close so we don't have waste, that we can burn the existing waste for 700 some years, and that proliferation resistance can be built into it. We're about to have a meltdown-proof small modular reactor in the U.S. in just a few years, a NuScale reactor. Are you open to that possibility?
Okay, thanks. I'll put those back to the panel. I'm not really, I think the point about gridlock and not everyone being California is obviously true. I'm not quite where we go with it, but Ben wants to go somewhere with it.
I do want to go somewhere because I think this gets to the point about restricting yourself to wind and solar and hydro, because you have agricultural interests in the middle of the country. You have, oil and coal interests, and these, you might not like these people, but they're politically powerful, and the climate problem is pressing on us. And if these people can see a role for themselves in a future energy economy, maybe they could, and see themselves as part of the solution, maybe they can politically support a carbon tax and other policies. But if we alienate the whole middle of the country, telling them that they have no role to play in any future energy system, it's a political dead letter.
Mark, what do you think of that? No, I'm addressing that question directly to Mark. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, the states with the most installed wind power are Iowa and South Dakota, and these are Republican states. So the premise is wrong that they're not benefiting from this economy. I mean, Texas has the actual greatest installed wind capacity. Iowa and South Dakota have 30% of all their electric power produced from wind they're exporting a lot. I mean, at least Iowa is. And I think, there are businesses, there are 100 businesses that want to go, all over Walmart, for example, wants to go to 100%, Microsoft and Starbucks and Johnson & Johnson, all these companies want to go to 100% renewable energy for their own stores, and they're all over the country. There's a big movement to transition to clean renewable energy in every state. I mean, some places are going to be slower than others, but the economics are so good. I mean, even Georgia and places in the South are starting to see they're missing out. You're either going to be going along and benefiting from this transition, or you're going to be missing out. So I think because the finances right now are so good, that's actually helping to transition in places that you would not normally expect.
There was an article this morning about a new solar thermal plant in Nevada, and the article is saying that the cost of electricity is 2.5 times more than natural gas. And so this idea that solar without subsidies can compete with natural gas, it just isn't right.
Can I clarify that?
Can I jump in on that point too?
You can jump in very quickly and then Mark will go back on it.
Yeah, so 2/3 of the cost of your solar panels on your roof are subsidized by taxpayers and ratepayers. So to the gentleman that asked the question, you're welcome. I'm paying for some of your solar panels. And that's fine. I'll keep you for your solar panels, but please let's just keep Diablo Canyon running. And the second thing I was going to say is that people don't realize that it's in the LA Times yesterday, the Porter Ranch gas leak. Why is all that gas being stored underground? As I may know, Southern California Edison needed it to back up variable wind and solar. You don't go from fossil fuels providing power 24/7 a day, 24/7 to intermittent 20 to 30% of the time solar and wind. You've got to have that backup. And then just on the final point, there is something that Republicans love as a climate solution. It's nuclear power. Lamar Alexander proposed 100 nuclear plants in the United States. John McCain proposed nuclear plants as part of cap and trade, and Dale's group actually killed that proposal. It made McCain so furious that he won't be involved in climate legislation ever again. James Inhofe, our most famous climate denier, is in favor of nuclear.
Really quickly, I think Ken is referring to Crescent Dunes, which is a concentrated solar power plant with storage, which is 13.1 cents per kilowatt hour, but you have to compare that with a gas peaker plant, which is between 15 and 22 cents per kilowatt hour. Conventional gas for heat and power is 5 to 7 cents, but not for peaking. Peaking is much more expensive than even CSP with storage now. And now even that CSP plant, the next one is going to be 9 cents a kilowatt hour, according to the company that's producing it.
And Mark, could I bring you in on the question that was from over there about where the leak from gas that is used to back up renewables gets rid of their benefit?
Well, in our plans, there's no gas for backup. We do everything with wind, water, solar, and low-cost storage. So when we electrify everything, it turns out that it's a lot easier to match power demand on the grid because you have more flexible demands. You don't need to connect a wind turbine to an electric car to run it.
Okay.
You get batteries. So in fact, you don't need gas in our system.
And the last of those questions, Dale, was what would open your mind to the glories of the atom?
Well, first, I just want to go back to the gridlock because I want to emphasize for Californians may not be aware how much traction clean energy has among Republican citizens and among states across the country, especially renewables. I mean, people love renewables, and not just in Iowa and South Dakota and Georgia. And there are really great policy leaps that you can see in Michigan, even Ohio, Arizona, where, sort of the states that are latecomers to the party have really taken leaps and bounds and sort of give lie to the idea that everything is just only happening on the coast. On the nuclear, this is what I was saying before in my comment about why I find some of what you're saying offensive. There's not a religious, hysterical objection that's not based on facts or information that's an objection to nuclear power. It's actually based on factual information. So I'm open to new technologies. I mean, we've been promised the next generation of nuclear power for 25 years. It's a unicorn. When it's not on a PowerPoint presentation and it's real and Wall Street wants to invest in it, and by the way, you're addressing the real, climate is a huge issue. It's not the only issue. There are other issues that we care about in terms of living and breathing, surviving in society, and nuclear addresses all of those. I am here, I think similar to what Ken said in the beginning. I want performance-based policies that drive investment in clean energy solutions that meet the pollution reduction goals that we have at the least cost. And if nuclear can do that, then I am open to looking at that. I haven't seen it, and I don't see it now.
Okay, I'm going to go for another set of questions. Right at the center.
Hi, thank you for this very enlivened debate. I work at the UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation, and we're currently partnering with the School of Engineering in developing a new technology that takes waste CO2 from power plant flue gas and uses that to make a CO2 neutral building material that would replace cement, which is the most widely used building material globally. I am interested in hearing your thoughts on new technologies such as this, if they were economically viable and could compete, and what problems you may foresee in pursuing new technology of this matter.
Okay, gentleman over there.
You were, you were looking for a miracle technology to come around and save us. There is a miracle technology that can come around and save you, and I want you to take and erase everything you know about fusion, because fusion is a potential within 10 years. It can produce 35 gigawatts of electricity. It can produce 500,000 barrels of oil per day. It can produce 3,000 acre feet of water.
Okay.
Now, am I just talking about something out there? No, this was done in 1976 by the Department of Defense. It was not a weapon, and so it was shelved. And DOE has not picked it up, and they should be picking it up.
Okay, thanks.
It's
We'll
clean,
come on to,
green, and very safe.
We'll definitely come on to that. Gentleman in the center.
I'm, to say the least, very upset with this discussion. I have never heard so much misinformation at a panel in my entire life, particularly here at UCLA, and I'm embarrassed for the rest of you. for someone to sit up here and say that Germany and Sweden have not shut down their nuclear power plants is a lie and false. You made a statement to that effect. Yes, you did.
I said France and Sweden.
Sweden has shut them down, so has Germany. My point is this. I was a member of the UN IPCC, and the statements that you were making regarding that are false and incorrect. The fact of the matter, yes,
Tell me what I said that was false.
you said a number of things having to do with what the UN IPCC
Tell me
was
what
doing.
I said that was false.
I have to go back.
If you're going to say
be specific,
I'm sorry.
because
okay, I'll do it right now. I'm talking about the market.
If you're going to say that someone said specifically false things, you do have to say what those specific false things
having to do with the market. The market is not what the UN IPCC was talking about. It was talking about life cycle analysis and externalities. I was part of the panel that started writing those papers and sections of books about this.
So what is it that you say?
He was talking about the market as being the place where these things are coming together, and that's not true. That's not what the UN IPCC was talking about.
Did I attribute that statement to the IPCC? What I said is the IPCC said that you could get rid of any individual technology and still solve the problem. The IPCC also said the problem would be easier to solve if you had a broad portfolio of technologies. That's what I refer to the IPCC. The market-based stuff that I talked about was me saying that I did not identify the IPCC as the source of the market-based comments.
Well, the fact of the matter is...
you can look at this later, and then I'm expecting an email of an apology from you.
No, and I'll expect one back from you as well. I expect also from Michael the same thing, because...
Okay, let's go to Michael. The question about Sweden. Sweden has shut down some nuclear power plants.
Sure, but...
I've looked over the oil and
look, look, everybody has shut down nuclear power plants.
Shut down nuclear power plants without replacement.
Yeah, the question now is, are they going to... the question is, are they going to shut down their whole nuclear fleet? And what I'm saying is that's not what's happening. It might happen, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Now, and Germany's doing the same thing.
We're not speaking of Germany, sir, but
he did earlier.
No, he really didn't.
Yes, he did. He talked about Germany.
Sir, I think you're misquoting us.
I really did not hear him say that about Germany, but I don't intend to pursue this any further at the moment. Gentleman over there. Yes, you.
I just wanted to ask, my experience in talking about sustainability is how we change the narrative. When I talk to people about sustainability, they think about their life is going to consist of the DirecTV commercial. I don't know if you've seen it, how we have to settle, and they're going to have to grow their own food and drive a cart. So how do we change this narrative for the general public? I mean, a lot of what we've talked about here today, I mean, I understand a lot of it, but for most people, what you've talked about goes right over their head. And until we get the buy-in from regular people, I don't see a lot of this gaining any traction at all.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yes, I'm going to talk about transportation, but really quickly, I need to correct Michael. You said that 2/3 of the solar systems in the United States are tax supported.
California.
The ITC is 30%. That's less than 1/3. So you're off by
just
over
one
50%.
subsidy. And I said California.
Regardless, you were wrong.
No, it's not.
He said specifically California.
What?
And he was talking about
Yeah,
another subsidy.
You said it's
taxpayers
2/3?
and ratepayers. Taxpayers and ratepayers, right? So that's what it is. You're paying. You're getting when you sell your electricity back to the grid, you're getting retail rates. You're not getting wholesale rates. That's
So
a
what?
subsidy.
It's worth.
Well,
if selling it
so
back
what
during
is
the
that you're not
during
paying
peak.
the cost of the
If you're
grid?
selling it back during peak times, the value of that energy is much higher.
Yeah, and it's not peak times you're selling it back.
Well, when I'm selling mine back. Anyway, I'm up here to talk about transportation.
You're up here to ask a question about transportation, and you're
Yes.
almost out of time.
My question is, which of you on the panel are driving electric cars or internal combustion cars? Raise your hand if you're driving an electric car.
Okay, I'll allow that. Who drives an
Thank
electric
you.
car?
Thank you. We don't drive in New York.
Incidentally, could I also ask another option? Which of you don't drive cars?
I try not to.
Okay. And this is just a freebie. And which of you drives a really cute Vespa? Okay, thank you very much. Over there. The guy's queuing up now. I'm sorry, you're wasting your time. This is basically the last question.
Thank you, and I think I have an appropriate last question. It's about sense of urgency. Last week, Bill McKibben published a piece that said if we want to keep global temperatures down to the 1.5 degree limit, that we have to essentially stop burning fossil fuels by 2020 in 4 years. So, I appreciate a lot of talk about what's going to happen 2050, but what's your sense of urgency about moving off of fossil fuels within the next 4 years? Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to ask, because we had a genuine question about fusion, which we haven't talked about at all, and regardless of the particular forms of fusion, I'm going to run that together with urgency. I think that those two go together quite well. Does anyone want to come up on the mixed question of urgency, do something within the next 4 years, and how we should think about fusion?
I'm not going to address fusion, but I will do urgency. If I were king of the world, I would say that we shouldn't build any other object that has a smokestack or a tail.
And when you say we there, would you include
I would
India?
say we, humanity.
Would you include South Africa? You'd include all countries?
Yeah, but I would also have us help the developing world to have energy access. But the thing is, we're not king of the world. And so we have to do things that work in real political systems, and that means having a broad portfolio and a broad political base.
Mike, is there anything you want to say about fusion? I'm just trying to...
I think we'll get it one day. I don't think it'll be in 10 years.
Okay, then I'm going to actually just run the other questions, and I appreciate that they weren't necessarily intended this way, but they seem to me to fit fairly nicely together. Questions about innovation and questions about changing the narrative, and I'm going to see whether the panel can think on their feet and wrap those notions into the closing remarks, which I must now ask them to make, since we've in fact run over time slightly. So if you could give a wrap-up which possibly addresses either innovation or changing the narrative, or just gives your sense of where you want to leave the conversation. I'm going to go in reverse order to where I started off, so I'm going to start with Michael.
Oh God, so I'm sorry, what am I supposed to do again? This is my closing remarks?
Closing remarks. If you can run in some changing narratives and innovation, then you get extra credit.
Great. Well, I think the first thing we need to do is we need to open our eyes to the fact that most of the world is not rich like we are, that 1/3 of humanity is still looking to liberate itself from wood and dung. And we need to understand that they're mostly going to choose fossil fuels because it's cheap and baseload power. And that puts a special responsibility on us to get over our irrational fears, and we know they're irrational because they're disproportionate to the risk of nuclear power. So if you really have an urgency around climate change, then you would not be closing down some of our best run nuclear power plants in the world. You would be asking for them to keep running, and you'd be seeking to build more of them. So once again, I want to reiterate, I would love to see Dale and Mark come with me in a press statement. We're going to include nuclear in the Clean Energy Standard. We're going to equalize all subsidies. And we're going to put all these things on a fair playing field, because I think we're ready for a new day. A lot of us have changed our minds. I think it's time for the two of you as well. What's that? I would love to do San Onofre. I would love to re-up San Onofre.
Enough.
Worth it.
Yeah. Yes, I love the changing the narrative question, so thanks for asking that. I mean, I think that is the real challenge for us, both to deal with urgency, and I think innovation is part of the way that we can do that, because it captures people's imagination about what's possible, and we can do that, and that's what we do in this country. We build better mousetraps, and we identify the problem, and we set up a system, and then it's always easier and cheaper and faster to meet than before we sort of tackled it, when it's always going to be the death of Western civilization as we know it. I can't tell you how many times I hear that in real policy debates. But there's this narrative now that's dominant around like all regulation is a job-killing energy tax, as opposed to regulation is what prevents things like Flint from happening to real people. And until we see these issues as things that affect real people and people's lives and quality of life, and then we frame the solutions as better cars, better homes, lower energy costs, and things that really mean something in people's daily lives, we're not going to be able to take the action that we need in the time frame to address the urgency of the problem that we're facing.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you get extra credit. Thank you very much. Ken.
Sometimes this problem's been posed just cartoon versions of both, say, Mark and Bill Gates. That one view is we already sort of have all the technologies and everything we need to know, and it's just a matter of political will. And the other side is, we need some innovation miracles. I think the reality is that we know enough to get going and get pretty far down the path. And but I think to reach our goals, we are going to benefit from innovation, and of course then some of that innovation will come through the deployment process.
Okay, thank you. And Mark?
Well, I'm going to say what I said at the beginning. I mean, we can solve this problem. We can solve the problem of transitioning the world to entirely clean, renewable energy. There's no technological or economic limitation to do it. The greatest barriers are social and political. And I think all of the above policy is one of the big obstructions. I mean, I think we're at a point where we have to pick winners and losers. I mean, it's an opportunity cost when you're picking a technology that we know has a history of problems. I mean, the problems it's not like nuclear just has one problem, or coal and carbon, it has multiple problems. And if you try to solve one or claim it doesn't exist, well, there's still others you still have to deal with. And, we've had all these technologies that people propose. I mean, there's cellulosic ethanol. Since 1981, huge amounts of money were spent. I mean, there's still not a commercial cellulosic ethanol factory anywhere. Coal with carbon capture, it's been a dead weight. I mean, nuclear, at least it was put up, but it has all these problems, and economically, it's not viable. You can see there's been a decline on average, although there's some growth in some parts of the world. But there are 195 countries in the world, and maybe 7 or 8 are trying to increase it, and the rest are going nowhere with it. But we have these solutions that we really want to solve the problem. We got to focus. I mean, there was the Betamax and VHS. I mean, nobody said, well, we should keep innovating the Betamax.
Betamax is better, actually.
I mean, you got to make decisions at some point and just pick the technologies that you think will work, the simplest, the safest, ultimately the cheapest, things that are natural. The natural system is what we all want to strive for. And so anyway, I'll just end on that, and I think we can solve this problem.
Thanks very much. I'm going to do something. I'm going to take a direction. I just want to take a sense of change. Could people raise their hands if they've had their mind changed about something here this evening? I'd say that's a pretty healthy result. I'm not going to ask you which way it changed. I'm just going to say I'm very glad that we helped you have an inspiring and invigorating evening. And thanks for a very inspiring and invigorating panel. Thank you very much indeed.
Now I'm lying on my back with hoof and mouth disease.
I don't know you were.